Welcome to StoryLearn. Here, every story teaches you English and also takes you on an exciting trip. I'm Alice, and I'll help you learn English with stories about famous people. Today, we're going to talk about Stephen Hawking. He was a very smart scientist who taught us how to be brave. His life was hard, but also wonderful. By listening to his story, you'll get better at English. You'll also learn to never give up, just like him. If this video feels too fast for you, you can slow it down. That way, you can understand everything better. Let's begin our journey with StoryLearn. Learning English will be fun and full of stories. Chapter 1. Who was Stephen Hawking? Stephen Hawking was a famous scientist from Britain. He was a teacher and wrote books. He discovered new things in science and made it easy for everyone to learn about space and the universe. When he was 21 years old and studying at the University of Cambridge, doctors told him he had a disease called ALS. There was a movie made in 2014 called The Theory of Everything that tells part of his life story. Chapter 2. Early Life. Stephen Hawking was born on January 8, 1942, in Oxford, England. He was born 300 years after a famous scientist named Galileo died, which made him very proud. He was the oldest of 4 kids in his family. His mum and dad were very smart and went to Oxford University. This was special because not many women, like his mum, went to college back then. His dad was known for studying diseases. Stephen was born when his family didn't have much money, and it was a scary time in England because of World War II. His parents were living in London but moved to Oxford because it was safer when Stephen was born. They later had 2 more daughters, Mary and Philippa, and they adopted a son named Edward in 1956. People thought Stephen's family was a bit odd. They would sit quietly at dinner and read books. They drove an old taxi and lived in a big old house that needed a lot of repair. They kept bees in their basement and made fireworks. When Stephen was a little boy, his dad got a job studying diseases and sometimes went to Africa for work. His dad hoped Stephen would become a doctor, but Stephen loved science and looking at the stars instead. His mum said Stephen always loved to wonder about the sky and stars. Stephen was always doing something. He and his sister Mary liked to find new ways to get into their house. He enjoyed dancing and was part of a rowing team in college. Chapter 3. Education. When Stephen Hawking was young, he was smart but not the top student in his class. In his first year at St Albans School, there were many students who had better grades than he did. However, Stephen liked doing things besides schoolwork. He enjoyed playing board games and even made up new games with his friends. As a teenager, he and his friends built a computer from old parts. This computer could solve simple math problems. At 17, Stephen went to University College at the University of Oxford. He wanted to study math, but Oxford didn't have a math degree, so he chose to study physics and cosmology instead. Stephen didn't study very much. He said he only studied about an hour each day. Still, he did well and graduated with good grades in natural science in 1962. Then he went to Trinity Hall at the University of Cambridge to get a PhD in cosmology. In 1968, Stephen joined the Institute of Astronomy in Cambridge. He did a lot of important work there. In 1973, he wrote a book called The Large-Scale Structure of Space-Time. In 1979, Stephen went back to the University of Cambridge. He got a very important job as the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, a position that has been around since 1663. Chapter 4. Wife and Children. Stephen met Jane Wilde at a New Year's party in 1963. They got married in 1965. They had a son, Robert, in 1967, and a daughter, Lucy, in 1970. Their third child, Timothy, was born in 1979. In 1990, Stephen left Jane for one of his nurses, Elaine Mason. They got married in 1995. This caused problems with Stephen's children because they felt Elaine kept them away from their father. In 2003, some nurses thought Elaine was hurting Stephen, so they told the police. Stephen said it wasn't true, so the police stopped looking into it. Stephen and Elaine divorced in 2006. After that, Stephen became closer to his family again. He made up with Jane, who had gotten remarried. He also wrote 5 science books for kids with his daughter, Lucy. Chapter 5. Stephen Hawking's Books. Stephen Hawking wrote or helped write 15 books. Some of his most famous books are: in 1988, Hawking became very famous with his book, A Brief History of Time. This book was about the universe, space, time, and the idea of God. It was written so that many people could understand big science ideas. The book was very popular. It was on the bestseller list in London for over 4 years. Millions of people around the world have read it, and it has been translated into more than 40 languages. But A Brief History of Time was hard to understand for some people. So, in 2001, Hawking wrote another book, The Universe in a Nutshell. This book had more pictures and explained big science ideas in an easier way. In 2005, he wrote A Briefer History of Time. This book made the ideas even simpler and talked about new science ideas like string theory. These 3 books talked about Hawking's big goal in science. He wanted to find one theory that explains everything in the universe, both the big things and the small things. Hawking had some big ideas. He thought that one day people might travel in time and live on other planets. In September 2010, Hawking wrote The Grand Design. Before, he said that believing in God and science together was okay. But in this book, he said that the universe started because of the laws of physics, like gravity. He said this means the universe could start on its own, without God. The Grand Design was Hawking's big book after many years. He wanted to show that the universe didn't need God to start. It could start from nothing because of the rules of the universe. Chapter 6. Stephen Hawking's Illness. When Stephen Hawking was 21 years old, doctors told him he had a disease called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. This meant the parts of his body that helped him move were slowly stopping working. Doctors thought he would live for only 2.5 more years. While studying at Oxford University, Stephen started having trouble walking without falling and speaking clearly, but he didn't pay much attention to it until 1963, his first year at Cambridge University. He kept these problems to himself at first. His dad noticed something was wrong and took him to a doctor. Stephen spent 2 weeks in a clinic where doctors did many tests on him. They looked at his muscles, put special tools on him, and even looked at his spine with a machine. After all these tests, they couldn't say exactly what was wrong, but they knew it wasn't multiple sclerosis. They said his illness was unusual. Later, the doctors confirmed that Stephen had ALS. This was very sad news for him and his family, but a couple of things happened that helped him feel a bit better. While he was in the hospital, Stephen shared a room with a boy who had leukemia. Seeing what the boy was going through made Stephen feel that his own situation could be worse. Soon after leaving the hospital, Stephen had a dream about being in danger. This dream made him think that he still had important things to do in life. Getting sick in this way changed how Stephen thought about life and work. Before, he wasn't very interested in his studies. After finding out about his illness, he realized he might not have much time, so he started working very hard on his research. Although Stephen's ability to move and control his body got worse, making him use a wheelchair by 1969, his disease didn't get worse as quickly as it does for some people. Despite his physical problems getting worse over time, Stephen's work and achievements continued to grow. Chapter 7. How Stephen Hawking Communicated. In the mid-1970s, Stephen Hawking needed more help because of his illness. A student who was learning from him moved in to help with his care and work. Stephen could still eat by himself and get out of bed, but he needed help with almost everything else. Talking became very hard for him, and only people who knew him well could understand what he was saying. In 1985, after a surgery on his throat, he couldn't speak at all. This meant he needed someone to take care of him all the time. This made it hard for Stephen to do his work. But a man from California who makes computer programs heard about Stephen. This man made a special program that let Stephen choose words on a computer by moving his head or eyes. These words were then spoken out loud by a computer. At first, Stephen could choose the words by pressing a button with his hand. Later, when he couldn't move his hands, he used a small muscle in his cheek to choose words. This was done with a special sensor. With this technology and help from other people, Stephen was able to keep writing a lot. He wrote many science articles and also books for people who are not scientists. Stephen's health was always something to be careful about. In 2009, he missed a meeting in Arizona because he was sick with a lung infection. That April, after saying he would stop working as the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge, he had to go to the hospital because he was very sick. Luckily, he got better after that. Chapter 8. Stephen Hawking's Study of the Universe and Black Holes. In 1974, Stephen Hawking became very famous in science because he found out that black holes are not places where everything disappears forever. He showed that tiny particles can actually come out of black holes, which was a new idea. A scientist named Roger Penrose had already made important discoveries about stars and black holes. He found out what happens to stars when they die and how black holes are made. Stephen was very interested in these ideas and started working with Roger to learn more about the universe and how it started. Their work together made Stephen very famous. He won many awards and was invited to teach at universities in both the United States and England. In 2015, Stephen talked about black holes again at a meeting in Sweden. He explained a new idea about them. When something falls into a black hole, information about it doesn't disappear. Instead, it might be kept at the edge of the black hole, in a way that's like a two-dimensional picture. Stephen also said that maybe this information can go to another universe. This idea changed how people think about black holes and showed they might not trap everything inside them forever. Chapter 9. How the Universe Started. In March 2018, Stephen Hawking talked on a show called Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson. He answered a question about what was there before the Big Bang, the event that started the universe. Stephen said there was nothing before the Big Bang. He explained this by using a special way of thinking about space and time, where time is imagined in a different way. This makes the universe's history look like a big curved shape that doesn't have a starting point. Stephen said we can think of this idea like the South Pole on Earth. Just like there is no place south of the South Pole, there was nothing before the Big Bang. Chapter 10. Stephen Hawking and Space Travel. In 2007, when he was 65 years old, Stephen Hawking did something exciting related to space. He visited the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where he got to feel what it's like to be in a place without gravity. He flew over the Atlantic Ocean in a special airplane for 2 hours. During the flight, he wasn't in his wheelchair and could float in the air. This experience made news all over the world. Stephen loved feeling weightless and said he could do it over and over. He was very excited about the idea of going to space. Stephen was planning to travel to the edge of space with Sir Richard Branson's space travel company. He believed that for humans to survive in the future, we need to start living in space. He thought going to space was very important and wanted more people to be interested in it. Chapter 11. Stephen Hawking in Movies and TV Shows. Stephen Hawking was like a superstar of science. He appeared in many TV shows and movies. He was on The Simpsons and Star Trek: The Next Generation. He even made a funny appearance with comedian Jim Carrey on Late Night with Conan O'Brien and had his voice in a Pink Floyd song called Keep Talking. In 1992, a movie about his life called A Brief History of Time came out. It was made by Errol Morris, a famous filmmaker. Stephen Hawking also appeared in other TV shows and movies. Chapter 12. The Big Bang Theory. In 2012, Stephen Hawking was on a TV show called The Big Bang Theory. It's a funny show about young scientists. In the show, Hawking meets Sheldon Cooper, one of the scientists, and tells him he made a mistake in his work. People really liked Hawking's appearance on the show. Chapter 13. The Theory of Everything. In November 2014, a movie about Stephen Hawking's life was released. It's called The Theory of Everything. Eddie Redmayne played Stephen Hawking. The movie shows Hawking's younger days, how he met and married Jane Wilde, how his illness affected him, and his great work in science. Chapter 14. Genius. In May 2016, Stephen Hawking presented a TV series called Genius. It had 6 episodes and asked volunteers to solve big science questions. Hawking said this show was part of his goal to make science interesting for everyone. He believed that regular people could think like the smartest scientists, and he hoped the show would prove that. Chapter 15. When Stephen Hawking passed away. Stephen Hawking died on March 14, 2018, because of ALS, a disease he lived with for over 50 years, much longer than doctors expected. He died at his house in Cambridge, England. Many people were sad about his passing. A famous scientist, Lawrence Krauss, said on Twitter, "We have lost an amazing person. Stephen Hawking was brave and taught us a lot about the universe and life." Stephen Hawking's children said they were very sad, but remembered him as a wonderful father and a great scientist. They mentioned how he inspired people everywhere with his work, bravery, and sense of humour. They recalled his words about the importance of loved ones, making the universe a special place. They said they would always miss him. It was later decided that Stephen Hawking's ashes would be placed in Westminster Abbey in London, near other famous scientists like Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. On May 2, 2018, A scientific paper Stephen Hawking worked on was published. He finished it just days before he died. In the paper, he and another scientist, Thomas Hertog, questioned the idea that the universe will keep getting bigger forever. And our video is finished. I hope you found it helpful for your journey in learning English. If you enjoyed it and want to discover more, please hit the subscribe button below to support us. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.